Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's news, Microsoft to require multi-factor authentication for all Azure users. Also, a roundup of some Patch Tuesday news, including a potential issue with one Windows update. And a big week for OpenAI and Google, who have shared details on their next big AI features. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which as always is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes ControlUp, end-to-end digital experience management for the work from anywhere era. ControlUp, happy users, happy IT. And also brought to you by Network's Policy Pack, where you use Group Policy, Policy Pack Cloud, or MDM to remove local admin rights, manage and lock down applications, Java, browsers, and mitigate ransomware, plus more. And of course, also brought to you by Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. Let's start off the news this week with some good news. In a surprising move, Broadcom have announced that they are providing a free personal use or a paid commercial use subscription for their pro versions of VMware Fusion and VMware Workstation. This is awesome news to me. I mean, I'm already paying for the vMug Advantage, so I get the products anyways, and I'll continue to do so as long as they're also supplying licenses for like ESXi and vCenter with that. But VMware Workstation has been my favorite VMware product for forever, pretty much. So this is really great news. If you don't use VMware Workstation in your home lab, this is a great opportunity to try it out because it's now going to be free to use. Also, likewise, for Mac OS users, VMware Fusion is there right now for you to use it free. That's awesome. If you have Windows applications, like for me, I really like using paint.net for doing my image editing. And I actually bought a MacBook thinking, oh, well, this is the superior device for doing media work. And then I was like, wait, no, I really, really like using paint.net and it's not available on Mac OS. Well, having it there via VMware Fusion is an option and it's now a free option. So that's awesome. If you'd like to avail of these free pro versions of Fusion and Workstation, you can register and download the latest builds from their new download portal at support.broadcom.com, which I actually mentioned last week because the VMware products were moved under VMware Cloud Foundation, I believe. And for commercial users, they've actually reduced the product group offerings down to a single SKU, which is VCF-DH-Pro. They say this simplification eliminates 40 plus other SKUs and makes quoting and purchasing VMware desktop hypervisor apps like Fusion Pro and Workstation Pro easier than ever. If you would like to purchase a subscription for those commercial purposes, it can be purchased from any Broadcom Advantage partner. So just a heads up, that's the good news because we're getting into some of those more cryptid security-related and patch-related stories now. This week saw another Patch Tuesday. The May Windows updates patch 61 flaws, 3 of those being actively exploited or publicly disclosed 0 days. The total rundown includes 17 elevation or privilege vulnerabilities patched, 2 security feature bypass vulnerabilities, 27 remote code execution vulnerabilities, 7 information disclosure vulnerabilities, 3 denial of service, and 4 spoofing vulnerabilities. One of the vulnerabilities Microsoft has fixed is an actively exploited bypass to OLE mitigations, which were added to Microsoft 365 and Office to protect users from vulnerable common OLE controls. It is not known how the flaw was abused in attacks or who discovered it. Microsoft has also fixed an actively exploited Windows DWM core library flaw that could be leveraged by hackers to gain system privileges. And for regular listeners of the podcast, you'll know that usually the information about problems or fallout caused by installing the updates is like a week or two removed from the actual Patch Tuesday. But there is some early fallout news this week. Some have reported errors trying to install KB5037765 on German language models machines running Windows Server 2019, getting an error 0x800F0982. Now, there's at least one person on Reddit saying that they had no problem installing this update, and the original poster suggested a possible localization problem, but it is early, so I guess we'll see what next week brings when more people have tested out the updates. And as is usually the case, other vendors have also released their own updates as part of Patch Tuesday, including the likes of Avanti, Adobe, Apple, and more. As part of Apple's updates, they've released security updates to fix a zero-day vulnerability in the Safari web browser that was exploited during this year's Pwn2Own Vancouver hacking competition by researcher Manfred Paul, who won more than $202,000 in cash after demoing a remote code execution zero-day combo against Apple Safari web browser and a double-tap RCE exploit, another remote code execution vulnerability, targeting an improper validation of specified quantity and input weakness in the Google Chrome and Edge web browsers during the first day of the hacking competition. He also shared other exploits against vulnerabilities against Firefox too. So very cool that researchers are getting paid and incentivized to do this ethical work. VMware has fixed 4 security vulnerabilities in Workstation and Fusion. Hey, we just talked about them at the beginning of the show. This includes 3 0 days exploited during the same Pwn2Own Vancouver 2024 hacking contest that I just mentioned in the Apple story. The most severe flaw patched is CVE-2024-22267, which is a use after free flaw in the V-Bluetooth device that was demoed by the Star Labs SG and Theory teams during the hacking contest. They stated a malicious actor with local admin privileges on a virtual machine could exploit this issue to execute code as the virtual machine's VMX process running on the host. VMware also provides a temporary workaround for administrators who cannot immediately install the security updates that were released. This workaround requires them to turn off the virtual machine's Bluetooth support by just unchecking the share Bluetooth devices with the virtual machine option. There are other vulnerabilities disclosed here too by VMware, including information disclosure vulnerabilities, a heap buffer overflow weakness, and more. And I'll share a link to the article for these vulnerabilities with this episode, which is episode 334, and you'll find that at 5bytespodcast.com if you'd like to read up on those. Google has patched their 6th zero-day vulnerability in Chrome this year. It's tracked as CVE-2024-4671. And this is a use after free class of bug that occurs in C-based programming languages. In these languages, developers have to allocate memory space needed to run certain applications or operations. And they do this by using pointers that store a memory address where the required data will reside. Because the space is finite, memory locations should be deallocated once the application or operation no longer needs it. Unfortunately, in this process, hackers are able to hijack these pointers for nefarious purposes, which seems to be the case here, although Google is not very good at sharing technical details of vulnerabilities in their products. The vulnerability does carry a severity rating of 8.8 out of 10, and in response, Google said it would be releasing versions 124.0.6367.201 or 202 for macOS and Windows, and 124.0.6367.201 for Linux. Now, with an update to a previous story covered on this podcast, Microsoft has fixed a known issue causing NTLM authentication failures and a spike in NTLM traffic on domain controllers after installing last month's Windows Server security updates. Microsoft fixed this known issue in Windows Server cumulative updates that were released as part of Patch Tuesday. The list of impacted Windows versions and the cumulative updates that fix the known issue includes Server 2022 with KB 5037782, Server 2019, that's KB 5037765. For Server 2016, it's 7763. For 2012 R2, it's 37823. For straight up 2012, it's 37778. For Server 2008 R2, it's 37780, and for Server 2008 SP2, it is 37800. So nice that they're updating even those much older versions of the Windows Server OS, I guess. Microsoft has also fixed a known issue breaking VPN connections across client and server platforms after installing last month's April 2024 security updates. For this one, I'm not going to list out the complete list of affected Windows versions and the cumulative updates to fix the VPN failures. I'll just share a link to that with this episode, which again is episode 334, but it is something that has been addressed and fixed with these recent Windows updates. And admins who cannot immediately install this Patch Tuesday update but need a fix can temporarily address the VPN issues by removing the problematic April cumulative update, which at this point you've probably already done that, so it kind of goes without saying. Microsoft will require MFA for all Azure users from this July. The rollout of this requirement will be gradual and methodical to minimize impact on different use cases. A blog post that has been published by Microsoft provides some information from the Azure product team to assist in getting ready for MFA enable for all users in your Azure tenant. Going forward, the team will provide communications to you about your specific rollout dates through direct emails and Azure portal notifications, and they say to expect these in the coming months. If you do not want to wait for the rollout and you'd rather just do it yourself ahead of time, you can set up MFA now with the MFA wizard for Microsoft Entra. And there's information on how to do that shared by Microsoft, which I'll share with this episode. Dell sent an email to customers notifying them of a breach that included customer data such as customer names, physical addresses, service tags, order information, date of order, item description, and warranty information. The breach data did not include email addresses, phone numbers, financial or payment information, or, quote, any highly sensitive customer information. But it does affect 49 million customers, so it is substantial. Interestingly, I personally had a researcher from TechCrunch.com reach out to me to collaborate as I was one of the contacted customers about the breach in order to try and validate whether or not that researcher was in contact with an individual claiming to be from the cyber gang or not. It seemed like, at least from my collaboration, at least as of now, he was unable to actually corroborate that this was indeed someone from the cyber gang. So I'm sure there's people who are pretending once there's a breach that they are involved when they're just not, and they're wasting people's time and possibly trying to get payment. But that was an interesting insight into what goes on for these tech outlets during these breaches. But regardless, interestingly, Ars Technica have suggested that the data may explain a problem that has plagued customers for years. Dell customers have been on the receiving end of scam calls from people claiming to be part of their support team. The scammers call from a valid Dell phone number, know the customer's name and address, and use information that should be known only to Dell and the customer, including the service tag numbers, computer models, and serial number associated with the past purchase. Then the callers attempt to scam the customer into making a payment, installing questionable software, or taking some other potentially harmful action. For their part, Dell have responded saying, quote, there are no indications these incidents are related, without further elaborating. The same representative declined to answer any additional questions, including whether the company has any idea how customer information has been making its way into the hands of scammers for almost a decade now. The notification further said, quote, we believe there is not a significant risk to our customers given the type of information involved. Oh boy. I mean, if that's the kind of information that these scam callers have been using for years, and it's presumably worked on some people, then it sure as hell is sensitive information. But hey, that's just alleged and partially my opinion, so you know. Google I/O was held this week, where Google unveiled LearnLM, which is a new family of generative AI models that's fine-tuned for learning purposes. It's a collaboration between Google's DeepMind AI research division and Google Research. LearnLM models are reportedly designed to conversationally tutor students on a range of subjects. Google will reportedly be working with educators to see how LearnLM might simplify and improve the process of lesson planning. According to TechCrunch.com, Google is also building Gemini Nano, which is reported to be the smallest of its AI models. It will be developed directly into the Chrome desktop client, starting with Chrome 126. This, Google says, will enable developers to use the on-device model to power their own AI features. Google plans to use this new capability to power features like the existing Help Me Write tool from Workspace Lab in Gmail, for example. Google also previewed a feature it believes will alert users to potential scams during calls on their Android devices, which seems actually pretty cool because that's been an area that has plagued people, particularly in the US, where telemarketer calls and scam calls are so prevalent, and it just seemed like nothing could be done. So this seems like a positive development. Google also announced Imagen 3, which is the latest in Google's Imagen generative AI model family for images. And it looks impressive. Compared with, say, Dolly, the photorealistic pictures shown in the demo look much more impressive, in my opinion. And I'll share a link if you want to see those pictures for yourself and what I'm talking about. Or you can check out the YouTube edition of this episode too, and you'll see it. They also talked about their Gemini AI feature, which seems pretty significant. This will replace the Google Virtual Agent, and they also discussed integration within Google-owned products like Android, Gmail, and Google Maps. So to me, this seems similar to Microsoft's Copilot strategy, where Gemini will be able to do things like completing emails, acting as an agent for things like doing trip planning in Google Maps, and so on. TechCrunch also reported that Google mentioned AI more than 120 times during their session. They also re-announced the previously announced Pixel 8a device and Pixel Slate device, but even those were showcased with an AI angle during the keynote. Probably the most important, in my opinion, was Google's plan to add more AI to its search. It's rolling out AI-powered overviews to users in the US initially. So that could be something that could help them claw back into the AI space ahead of, say, Microsoft or AWS or obviously OpenAI. You know, they have that captive audience for search. So if they're able to successfully integrate AI within the actual search that people are already relying on, then that could be a lot of people's first exposure to AI. Google also plans to use generative AI to organize the entire search results page for users. That's in addition to the existing AI overview feature that I just mentioned, which creates a short snippet with an aggregate of information about a topic you were searching for. That AI overview feature becomes generally available this week in the US, so if you're in the US, you should probably be seeing that now. I'll share a link to all the announcements with this episode, which again is episode 334 if you want to check it out for yourself. The Washington Post reported on a recent study by People Data Labs to understand the impact that forced returns to the office had on employee tenure and the movement of workers between companies. They found there was a strong correlation between senior level employees departing directly after a mandate was implemented, suggesting these policies had a negative effect on the tenure and seniority of their respective workforce. High-ranking employees stayed several months less than they might have without the mandate. And it suggests that in many cases, they actually went to work for direct competitors. At Microsoft, the share of senior employees as a portion of the company's overall workforce declined more than 5 percentage points after the return to office mandate took effect. At Apple, the decline was 4 percentage points, while at SpaceX, the only company of the three to require workers to be fully in person, the share of senior employees dropped 15 percentage points, according to the research. Apple spokesman Josh Rosenstock criticized the study, though, saying that it drew inaccurate conclusions and does not reflect the realities of our business. In fact, attrition is at historically low levels, according to Rosenstock. Robert Ployhart, a professor of business administration and management at the University of South Carolina, questioned the need for a return to the office, as there's nothing pointing to a widespread drop-off in productivity as hybrid work has increased, according to him. So certainly an interesting tug-of-war going on here. In a similar story, after reversing its position on remote work, Dell is reportedly implementing a new tracking technique to ensure its workers are following the company's return to the office policy. From May 13th, most workers are going to be classified as either totally remote or hybrid. Starting this month, hybrid workers have to go into a Dell office at least 39 days per quarter, which I believe I covered on a previous episode of the podcast. Fully remote workers, meanwhile, are ineligible for promotion. Via an unnamed source, the Register reported that Dell will track employees' badge swipes and VPN connections to confirm workers are in the office for a significant amount of time. Dell's methods for tracking hybrid workers will also reportedly include a color coding system. The Register reported that Dell plans to make weekly site visit data from its badge tracking available to employees through the corporation's human capital management software and to give them color-coded ratings that summarize their status from consistent to limited presence, and the colors are blue, green, yellow, and red. A different person who reportedly works at Dell said the managers hadn't shown consistency regarding how many red flags they would consider acceptable. The confusion led to the source telling the Register, quote, "It's a shit show here." One of the few episodes I'll have to put an explicit marker on, I guess. An unnamed person reportedly familiar with Dell claimed that those failing to show up to a Dell office frequently enough will be referred to Dell's COO, Jeff Clark. And this is all in the context of many years of Dell management championing remote work. So it is quite an about-face turn here. On Monday, OpenAI debuted GPT-4o, and the O stands for Omni. According to Ars Technica, this is a major new AI model that can ostensibly converse using speech in real time, reading emotional cues, and responding to visual input. It operates faster than OpenAI's previous best model, GPT-4 Turbo, and will be free for ChatGPT users and available as a service through the API, rolling out over the next few weeks. It is actually pretty crazy. Now, like I just read that statement from Ars Technica, but I've also viewed the demo videos from OpenAI. So OpenAI claims that GPT-4o responds to audio inputs in about 320 milliseconds on average, which is similar to human response times in conversation. OpenAI announced that GPT-4o will be accessible to all ChatGPT users, with paid subscribers having access to 5 times the rate limits of free users. So that's already similar to the existing model for GPT. They say in API form, they'll also reportedly feature twice the speed, 50% lower cost, and 5 times higher rate limits compared to GPT-4 Turbo. So you should really check out the demo video for yourself because it's some pretty out of this world stuff, like pointing the phone at a pond and saying, "Hey, what are these ducks doing?" And oh, it looks like the ducks are just gliding pretty casually, and they're not in a rush, and they're bobbing their heads down into the water, possibly to catch food, and just asking the service to translate a conversation, saying, "Hey, I'm going to speak in English to my friend who only speaks Spanish, and he's only going to speak Spanish to me. Can you translate what I say into Spanish and then translate what he says back to me in English?" And it does it seemingly seamlessly. What it will actually be like when you try to use the service, I'm not sure, but I'm looking forward to trying it out. Also on Monday, OpenAI announced several updates to ChatGPT, including a ChatGPT desktop app for macOS, which began to roll out to a few testers and will become more broadly available in the coming weeks. OpenAI is also streamlining the ChatGPT interface with a new home screen and message layout. And I assume the actual GPT-4o model will mean an app for mobile devices, because in the demo, they're like pointing their phone at a pond and asking it to do things and resting their phone on a table in order to do that translation that I talked about. So this seems like a major leap in development for ChatGPT. It wasn't all great news for OpenAI this week, during these events and discussions. The controversial figure, Sam Altman, who's the head of OpenAI, had made some comments about how, forget around the UBI, which is like the universal basic income, I think, or base income, and having instead a universal base compute where there's compute assigned to individuals, and it's just like, I don't know, sociopathic stuff, and a guy who's like just completely obsessed with his space and his expertise and trying to apply that more broadly to society. Obviously with OpenAI, there was all this like ethical questions, and they were committing to deploying and rolling out AI services and features in an ethical manner, but then seemingly some of that was walked back, like the commitment around like military use was walked back seemingly a few months ago. So while this is exciting developments, I've also got skepticism due to the corporateness of the whole thing, and they're not necessarily going to do what's best for people in all of this is my concern, and I'm sure it's a concern for everyone else. But hey, let's get on to the scripts, tricks, and tips. Going to keep it short this week because I feel like the news ran pretty long. But Dan Rios with the first one, who has a great post on Pester unit tests for Azure Bicep modules. So combining two great automation platforms in Pester and Azure Bicep. Also, Christian Ritter shared a PowerShell tip for getting the first line of a large file really fast in PowerShell using the switch-file method. So this is something I was not aware of, and this is a really cool one to use for me in future, and I'm sure it'll be of interest to others who use PowerShell too. Well, that's it for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you so much for listening.